She called me like she was ordering takeout, and in that second I knew my marriage had turned into paperwork. Blythe didn't yell. She didn't even sound mad. She sounded busy. My name was Cyrus Keene. I was 50 years old, and I ran a small calibration and industrial verification lab out in western New York. The kind of place where a bad decimal point can cost somebody a whole contract and get my phone ringing at midnight. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early February. I was in my office listening to a pump test in the next room when my cell lit up with Blythe's name. I answered, expecting a grocery question or a complaint about the furnace. "Cyrus," she said, crisp as a receptionist. "I inherited a lot of money. Millions. Pack your things and be out of my house by dinner." I looked at the wall calendar like it might explain what planet I was on. "You're serious?" "I'm done," she said. "Don't make this messy." I didn't argue. 2 weeks earlier, her uncle Eldon Marr had called me from a palliative care center. His voice had been thin, but his mind was sharp. "When Blythe hears the word inheritance," he'd warned, "she'll swing first. Don't swing back. Read everything. My will has guardrails she hasn't seen." I'd thanked him and promised I would. I didn't know what guardrails meant then, but I knew Eldon wasn't a man who used fancy words for fun. So on that phone call, I kept my voice flat. "Fine, Blythe," I said. "I'll be there." I walked out to the main bay like nothing happened. My two techs were checking a batch of gauges, hands in gloves, eyes on the numbers. I pointed at the logbook, handed off the next job, and told them exactly what to do if a client called with questions. I shook a vendor's hand and even smiled. The calm felt wrong, like my body was saving the panic for later. Then I drove home with both hands tight on the wheel, the kind of quiet you get right before thunder hits. I wasn't thinking like a husband anymore. I was thinking like a guy building a case file. When I pulled into the driveway, every light in the house was blazing, curtains open like a showroom. I stepped inside, and there she was in the living room, dressed sharp, hair perfect. Verity Sloan, her best friend, sat on the couch with her legs crossed, wearing the kind of smile that said she thought she belonged there. Blythe didn't offer hello. She pointed at a stack of expensive-looking papers on the coffee table. "Sign these," she said, "and leave." I took a breath, leaned over the table, and picked up the top page. The paper felt thick, like it came from a boutique printer, and the header screamed "Agreement" in a fancy font. I flipped the corner and read slow, the same way I checked a calibration certificate when a client swore everything was standard. What jumped out first was what wasn't there. No court stamp, no index number, no docket line, no notary block. Nothing that tied it to a real filing. Blythe stayed standing with her hands folded, chin up, watching me like I was wasting her time. "I want this clean, Cyrus," she said, polite as ice. "You sign, you take your things, and we don't do an ugly scene." Verity sat there quiet, eyes bouncing from my face to the signature lines, waiting for any crack she could use. I turned a page, and then another, letting the silence stretch. The language was full of confident little lies, like the formatting itself was supposed to scare me into obedience. I tapped the bottom of one page with my fingertip. "Where is the court filing information?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Blythe's smile tightened, and Verity finally slid in, sweet and sharp. "You're overthinking this, Cyrus, because you hate losing." I didn't answer her. I found the first signature line, took the pen Blythe had set out like bait, and signed my name once, slow and readable. Then I wrote beside it in block letters, big enough for anyone with eyes. "Received only, not agreed, no notary, not court-filed." Blythe's nostrils flared for a second because she'd wanted a clean signature, not a warning label. Before either of them could start pushing again, I pulled out my phone and documented everything. I photographed every page, every initial box, every header, and every clause they thought I'd miss, making sure the timestamp was on. Blythe shifted her weight and said, "Are you done being dramatic?" Like proof was a hobby. I kept going until I had it all, then slid the stack back to the center of the table. I moved through the house with purpose, not panic. I grabbed my laptop, my prescription meds, a week of clothes, and the folder with our marriage certificate copy. I took my lab key fob off the hook by the back door, because I wasn't letting my business get dragged into her play, and I set everything in 2 bags by the entry. Blythe lifted her phone and turned slightly away, making it loud on purpose. "He's leaving now, it's handled," she said, like she was closing out a deal. I looked at her, gave her a small smile that felt like bare teeth, and said, "Good luck with your plan." Then I picked up my bags, walked out, and drove straight to a chain hotel off the highway. The kind with cameras, receipts, keycard logs, and board staff, and I shut the room door behind me. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet, and the heater clicked like it was annoyed to be working. I set my bags against the wall, opened my laptop on the little desk, and stopped thinking like a husband entirely. I treated my life like an audit, because feelings weren't going to protect me and facts actually might. I logged into everything I could remember: our bank, our cards, our insurance portal, and every account that had a password tied to my phone. I made folders by month and year, and I downloaded statements like I was building a client file for a lawsuit. Every PDF got a name with a date, because I wasn't about to let Blythe blur the timeline and claim I imagined things. The transfers showed up fast once I stopped skimming and started sorting. Joint money went out in neat little bites to an account tied to her mother, Nadine Rooks, and it wasn't a one-time helping family thing either. It started small, then got bolder, and it ran back almost 7 years like a quiet leak nobody wanted to admit existed. When I added it up on a spreadsheet, it landed around $276,850, and I felt my jaw lock because that wasn't careless spending, that was a plan. Then I checked the insurance portal, and that's where I found the nastier move. There was a pending request to remove me from the family health policy, submitted days before Blythe made her millions call like she was booking a haircut. It sat there in the system with a timestamp, waiting for approval, like she'd tried to pull my coverage out from under me before she even shoved me out of the house. I took screenshots of everything, exported the statements as PDFs, and saved copies in 2 places because I didn't trust a single device anymore. Then I emailed the whole bundle to Wes Granger, a family law attorney I'd met years earlier during a vendor dispute. Wes wasn't the kind of guy who got excited and flailed around. He got organized and stayed mean about details, which was exactly what I needed. In the email subject line I wrote, "Immediate, documentation and timeline," and I attached enough proof to make my laptop run hot. While I was in that mode, another problem popped up that wouldn't stay quiet. I saw signs Blythe had been poking around my lab's business credit line. Little notifications and access attempts that didn't match my normal logins, like she was sniffing for leverage beyond the house. I called the lender and kept my voice calm. "I need a freeze on any changes unless I show up in person with my identification," I said. And the rep paused like she heard the stress but didn't care why. "We can place that restriction right now," she replied, "and I'll send written confirmation to your email." The confirmation email hit my inbox a minute later, and I saved it straight into my folder like it was gold. Not long after that, Blythe started texting, nasty and confident, saying I was weak, saying I couldn't afford a lawyer, saying she had serious people advising her. I screenshotted every message, then answered once, sharp and clean. "All communication goes through counsel." I hit send, turned my phone face down on the desk, and kept building the file. My phone didn't stay face down for long, because it started buzzing hard enough to creep across the cheap desk like it had a mind of its own. I flipped it over and saw Sable's name, and that hit different than Blythe's texts because my kids didn't play games. I answered on the second ring, keeping my voice steady even though my throat felt tight. "Dad, what did you do?" Sable demanded, and she didn't sound scared so much as furious. "Mom said you couldn't handle her success and you stormed out like a child." I could hear fluorescent hum on her end, like she'd stepped into a hospital hallway to make the call, and it made me picture her in her med school scrubs, shoulders squared, proud as a hammer. "I didn't storm out and I didn't disappear," I said, slow enough that she could actually hear me. "I left because your mother set up a trap and I'm staying safe until my lawyer says otherwise." Sable exhaled like she wanted to fight somebody through the phone, and I kept going before she could spin up. "Whatever happens between me and her doesn't change who I am to you and your sister, so don't let her sell you a story." Sable went quiet for a beat, then she said, "I need to know you're not going to bail on us," and the edge in her voice cracked into something younger. "I'm not bailing," I told her, and I meant it with my whole chest. "I'm still your dad, and you can call me any time, even if she hates that." She said she had a lab group waiting and she'd call back, and I told her to focus on school and let me handle the adult mess. Then I ended the call before my emotions got ahead of my mouth. Later that evening, my phone rang again, and this time it was Taryn. She was 21 and finishing college, and her voice was tight like she'd swallowed nails and didn't want to admit it. "Dad, I went to the house," she said, and I heard her breathe through her nose like she was trying not to shake. I asked Mom what she thought she was doing, and I recorded it because she kept acting like I was stupid. My stomach dropped, not because I doubted Taryn, but because I knew Blythe, and I knew what a calm liar she could be. "Send it to me," I said, and my tone left no room for debate. "And send it to my lawyer when I give you the address." Taryn didn't argue, she just pushed on. "She didn't even yell," she said. "She talked like she was explaining a budget." The audio file came through a minute later, and I played it with the volume low, one earbud in, staring at the hotel wall like it had answers. Blythe's voice on the recording was smooth and controlled, and it made my skin crawl. "Your father is unstable, and I can't keep living like that," she said. "I've been planning my exit for years because I deserve better." Then she said the part that turned my hands cold. "If Sable wants her school paid for, she'll cooperate, because money teaches responsibility." I saved the file, forwarded it to Wes, and then sent it to Sable with a short note that stayed clean and factual. "This is your mom's own voice, and I'm not adding commentary." Right after that, an email notification slid across my screen from a name I didn't recognize. And when I opened it, there was a whole chain from a realtor named Cade Wexler. He wrote like we already had a relationship, saying my house was pre-listed, and a buyer wanted paperwork signed fast. I forwarded the whole chain to Wes and typed, "This is moving fast and I did not authorize anything," because something about it felt staged. Then I watched the sent confirmation like it was a heartbeat. Wes called a few minutes later, voice level and already in checklist mode. "Do not call the realtor yet," he said, and I could hear paper shuffling on his end. "We're going to probate first, and we're going to see what your wife thinks she actually inherited." I told him I could be there, and he replied, "Be on time and keep your face calm because court staff remember everything." Probate court smelled like old files and disinfectant, and the hallway had that dull echo that makes every whispered lie sound louder. Wes met me by the metal benches, gave me a short nod, and walked me into the room like he owned the calendar. That's where I met Claudia Barrios, the probate court coordinator assigned to the judge on Eldon's file. And she looked like a woman who had spent years watching families rip each other apart without once feeling impressed. Her expression stayed dry and sharp, and she moved papers with the same patience a butcher uses with a knife. Blythe swept in like she was headed to a gala, not a courtroom, and Verity was glued to her shoulder like a decorative weapon. Blythe's eyes snapped to me, and she leaned close enough that I could smell expensive perfume and arrogance. "You do not belong here," she hissed, smiling without warmth. Wes didn't even glance at her outfit. "The decedent required his attendance," Wes said, calm and loud enough for Claudia to hear, and Blythe's smile twitched like it hurt. Claudia stood, looked at the file, and started reading from the estate's filings on the record like she was reciting math. She laid it out clean. Eldon's so-called millions weren't a pile of cash waiting for Blythe to scoop up. It was properties with mortgages still attached, deferred repairs that hadn't been handled, tenant protections that limited what could be done, and restrictions that made quick liquidation basically impossible without tripping a dozen rules. Blythe's posture stayed tall, but I watched her blink harder, like she was trying to force reality back into the shape she wanted. Then Claudia flipped to another page and read the part Blythe didn't expect, and the room shifted in a way you can feel in your ribs. Eldon Marr appointed Cyrus Keene as the compliance observer for the estate's administrative period, Claudia said, and her eyes flicked up just once to make sure it landed. She kept going, explaining that big moves required documentation and verification through me, and I heard Blythe's breath catch like she'd swallowed something sharp. Blythe leaned toward Verity, whispering fast, and Verity's face finally lost its smug shine. Wes stayed still, and I kept my hands flat on the table, because the point wasn't to gloat, it was to let the paper do the hitting. The judge requested the supplemental filing, and Claudia cued a short recorded video statement from Eldon. The screen showed him in that care center room, thin and tired but fully present, and a staff witness stood off to the side like a guardrail with a badge. Eldon looked into the camera and said, "If you were watching this, then Blythe heard the word inheritance and tried to swing first." And my stomach tightened because he'd called it like weather. He explained why he built protections, why he didn't trust Blythe with quick power, and why he trusted me to enforce the rules. And Blythe's face went stiff like it was cracking under paint. When we stepped out of the hearing, my phone buzzed with a new text from Cade Wexler. He said a retired judge named Lowell Harrow had put down a large deposit on my house after Blythe showed him official-looking paperwork and promised a same-week close, and Wes didn't even let me finish reading before he pointed toward the exit. I followed him out and headed for the car, already dialing Cade as we moved. Cade answered on the second ring, and his voice already sounded like he knew he'd stepped in something. I told him I was with my attorney and we were on our way, and he didn't try to talk tough. "Please come now," he said, quick and thin. "The buyer's here, and he's not happy." Cade's office was all glass and staged calm, like every surface was meant to make people forget they were signing their lives away. He hustled us into a conference room, and that's where I saw Lowell Harrow sitting at the table with his hands folded, suit pressed, expression flat. He didn't need to raise his voice because he had that kind of quiet authority that made you sit up straight without thinking. When Cade introduced him as a retired judge, it clicked why Blythe picked him as a target, because she loved anything that looked official. Harrow looked at me once, then at Wes, and he didn't waste time. "Tell me why I'm here," he said, like he'd already decided somebody was about to regret something. Wes opened his folder and spoke like he was reading instructions to a machine that had to comply. "She has no authority to sell a marital home on a rushed schedule like this," Wes said. "The paperwork she provided is not court-backed, and there is no filed order that supports what she claimed." He slid copies across the table and kept his tone steady. "Probate restrictions are now on record, and she represented them as liquid and simple when they are not." Cade tried to smile through it, and it came out as a grimace. "I was told everything was approved," he said, looking at Harrow instead of looking at me. Harrow lifted one eyebrow and Cade's shoulders dropped like he'd been physically pushed. Harrow's voice stayed calm, but it had teeth. "You will return my deposit within a short window," he said, slow and clear. "You will also document in writing exactly what was presented to you and by whom." He paused, then added, "And I will be reporting this attempted misrepresentation, because I do not tolerate games that use my name as a costume." Cade nodded too fast. "Yes, Judge Harrow, I understand," he said, and he looked like a man realizing he'd been used as a prop in someone else's play. Wes asked for Cade's full file, including the emails, the draft listing, and the buyer communications, and Cade agreed without bargaining. I didn't gloat or lecture because there was nothing to celebrate, only damage to contain, and we walked out with copies and a paper trail. That same week, Blythe shifted tactics, because the money fantasy had taken a hit, and she needed a new weapon. Verity started seeding the story in Blythe's social circles, the school board types and donor dinner types who loved gossip dressed up as concern. Suddenly I was unwell and dangerous, and people who'd never stepped foot in my lab were acting like they'd seen a police report. I found out the realistic way, not through a dramatic confrontation, but through an email from a longtime client. Their message was polite, but I could read the discomfort between the lines. They asked if we were stable, because someone had warned them I might be under investigation, and they didn't want their compliance audits tied to a mess. I forwarded that email to Wes right away and called him, because my business was not collateral in Blythe's tantrum. "This is the new play," I said. "She's trying to poison my reputation so I lose clients before court." Wes didn't sound surprised, which annoyed me and calmed me at the same time. "We answer like professionals," he said. "No drama, no insults, and no admissions." He dictated a client-facing statement that was calm and factual, with dates and plain language, and he had me prepare exhibits we could provide if anyone pushed. I attached the statement draft to a reply, saved the exhibits in a clean folder, and hit send to my client with my hands steady on the keyboard. That should have bought me some quiet, but Blythe wasn't looking for quiet. She was looking for control. And when the rumor lane didn't shut me down fast enough, she went for the legal lane. A process server showed up with papers saying she was asking the court to restrict contact, claiming she feared me, and she'd attached photos meant to suggest an incident that had never happened. It was the same move as the fake divorce stack, just higher stakes, because a court order could lock me out for real and make me look guilty before I ever spoke. Wes met me outside the courtroom and didn't waste time on comfort. "Do not react to her story," he said, tapping the folder in his hand. We don't argue feelings, we show locations and timestamps. I nodded, because that was my language, and I'd brought what I had: hotel keycard logs, receipts, and a printed timeline from my lab's access system. Inside, Blythe sat with her attorney in that soft, injured expression she practiced in mirrors. When she glanced at me, she didn't look scared. She looked annoyed, like I kept refusing to follow her script. Her lawyer started talking about fear and escalation, and Blythe held still, eyes shiny, like she was auditioning for sympathy. I kept my hands folded and stared at the judge because I wasn't there to perform. When it was our turn, Wes stood and kept his voice flat. "Your Honor, the allegations do not match the record," he said, and then he started laying it out. I didn't raise my voice or throw words back at her. I presented. I showed the hotel keycard logs proving when I entered and left, and receipts that tied me to that place on the dates she claimed I was near her. I handed over my lab badge timestamps because my business had tight access control, and it showed I'd been at work when she claimed I was near her. Wes asked permission to reference video, and the judge allowed it, so we described the hotel hallway cameras and the time ranges. The judge's face didn't soften for anyone, and he looked down at Blythe's filing like it irritated him. "Ms. Keene, these dates do not align," he said, and Blythe's attorney tried to pivot, but the judge cut him off with a raised hand. "This court is not the place for false filings," the judge said, sharper now. "The request is denied." Then he leaned forward and made it worse for her, the way a real warning sounds when it's on the record. "If you submit misleading evidence again, you will face consequences beyond embarrassment." He granted sanctions too, requiring her to reimburse part of my legal costs, and I didn't smile because the satisfaction was colder than that. It was the system finally saying, out loud, that she didn't get to rewrite reality just because she spoke politely. Outside the courtroom, Blythe lost control of her expression for half a second. I saw rage and humiliation flash across her face, and her jaw tightened like she wanted to spit on the floor. Then she snapped it back into that neat smile and turned to her lawyer like nothing happened, like she'd planned the loss as a strategy. Around that time, another crack opened in her own family. Wes got a message asking for a private call from Kellen Rooks, Blythe's brother, and Wes put him on speaker with me in the hallway. Kellen sounded nervous and embarrassed, which was new for him. "I loaned her money against the inheritance," he admitted, voice low. "She promised it was guaranteed, and now I'm hearing words like fraud." Wes didn't coddle him. "If you have texts or emails, you send them," he said. Kellen exhaled hard. "I have texts where she talks about pushing Cyrus out fast and paying me back big," he said, and he sounded like he hated himself for it. Wes gave him an email address and a deadline, and within minutes the screenshots started coming in. I watched Wes save them into the case folder. Then I followed him to the printer and started stacking fresh pages into our growing file. Wes let the printer spit out the last page. Then he slid the stack into a folder and shut it like he was sealing a hatch. "Now we tighten everything," he said, and he didn't sound impressed, just focused. "Probate has one more item Eldon left in the file, and we're not touching it until the judge signs the release order." When the order came through, Wes drove me straight back to probate instead of letting it sit in the mail. Claudia Barrios met us in the same bland hallway, looking like she ran on black coffee and distrust. She didn't do small talk, and I respected that. She checked the judge's signed order, then pulled a sealed envelope from a locked drawer like it was a classified file. My name was printed on the log label in neat block letters, and Eldon's handwriting ran along the edge where he'd initialed the seal. Claudia handed it to Wes, not me, and her voice stayed flat. "This is released per the order," she said. "Anything inside is your issue now, not the court's issue." Wes thanked her, and we walked out without stopping because the whole thing felt like carrying a live wire. Back in Wes's office, he set the envelope on his desk and opened it like evidence, not sentimental mail. Inside were letters Eldon never sent, dated over years, all of them calm and ugly in the way only an old man's notes can be. He wrote about seeing Blythe meet my old friend Gavin Drescher, not once, but in a pattern, with timing that lined up with nights she claimed she was running errands or helping a friend. Eldon didn't call it an affair outright, but he didn't need to, because he logged closeness, touches, and the way they moved like people who thought they were private. Wes slid one page toward me. "This matters for credibility," he said, tapping the dateline. "It also explains why Eldon built guardrails." My jaw tightened, but I didn't explode, because I was past the point where yelling fixed anything. I asked, "What else did he leave?" And Wes kept turning pages. There was a separate note about Blythe trying to get Eldon to sign updated documents while he was medicated, and Eldon wrote the staff witness name and date like he wanted it traceable forever. It matched the probate video details, which meant Blythe had been running this angle for a while, not just since her fake millions phone call. Wes set that note aside and said, "This is the kind of thing judges remember because it smells like pressure." Then I hit the ugliest note in the envelope, and my hands went cold around the paper. Eldon had written that Blythe once floated a rumor about Taryn's parentage when she was angry, not as fact but as leverage, the kind of poison she kept in reserve for the right moment. I felt a flash of heat behind my eyes, but I let it pass. "That stays buried unless she tries to use it," I said. Wes nodded. "Agreed. It has no place in court unless she opens that door herself." He clipped the note into a protected section of the file and pushed the rest of the stack back toward me. "What matters now is pattern and credibility," he said, "and we already have both." Taryn found out only that Eldon had left additional notes about Blythe, because Wes's office sent a confirmation to the wrong email thread and copied her by mistake. My phone lit up with her name before I could warn her. When I answered, she didn't cry and she didn't accuse me. "Dad, if there's more in those papers, don't soften it for me," she said, voice tight but controlled. "I just need you to tell me the truth." I told her the truth that mattered most. None of Eldon's notes changed who she was to me, and none of them changed what Blythe had already done in plain sight. She went quiet for a beat, then said, "Okay," and that one word settled more in me than a speech would have. After we hung up, I texted Wes, "Keep the note sealed unless she forces it into the case," and hit send. Right after I sent that text, my laptop pinged with a new email, and this time the timing actually made sense. The sender was Maribel Crane, a quality director at a Colorado firm, and she said one of the vendors who had watched me handle the client panic had passed along my name. Her message was blunt in a way I respected. They needed someone who lived by documentation and standards, and they were tired of cleaning up after people who thought charm counted as process. I called her because I didn't trust opportunities that only lived in inboxes, and she picked up like she was expecting it. "Cyrus, I'm glad you called," she said. "I've read about your lab work, and I need someone who can build compliance that holds up under pressure." I kept my voice steady and professional, even though my life felt like it was balanced on a filing cabinet. "If you need clean records and zero drama, that's what I do," I told her. And she didn't waste time pretending this was casual. "Then let's talk compensation and start dates," she said, "because I need the role filled, not admired." I didn't announce that offer to anyone, not to Blythe, not to my daughters, not even to a buddy at the lab. I let it sit as private leverage, because in court, separation dates and paperwork timing mattered more than pride. If Blythe wanted to play queen of sudden money, I was going to keep my own cards face down until the moment they mattered. Wes had me in his office the next morning, and he was already building what he called a settlement binder, like it was a closing binder for a business sale. He didn't make it pretty, he made it lethal. He labeled sections for the transfer trail to Nadine, the insurance removal attempt, the frozen credit line confirmation, the false restraining order record, Taryn's audio file, Kellen's texts, and Eldon's probate guardrails. He looked up at me once and said, "When they try to talk, we hand them records because records hold up better than speeches." Blythe's legal team asked for a conference fast, and I could tell it wasn't because they wanted peace. It was because they understood trial would be ugly and public, and Blythe's whole power play depended on me looking unstable. That angle wasn't holding anymore, not with sanctions on the record and her fake urgency getting exposed in probate and real estate. Wes went through the estate filings again and tapped the page like he was pointing at a crack in a wall. "Her millions are an anchor," he said, and his tone stayed flat. "Restricted properties, debt service, repair obligations, and creditors she already charmed into lending. And now they want their money back." I pictured Blythe in her tailored outfit, smiling at people like she'd bought the world, and I felt nothing warm about it. She couldn't flip it, she couldn't brag it into cash, and her creditors weren't going to wait for her to spin it. I wasn't interested in making a scene or winning sympathy. I was interested in letting the math, the record, and the court schedule do what they do until her status turned into liabilities with deadlines. I walked into that conference room with Wes beside me and the binder under my arm, and I set it on the table hard enough to make the pens jump. Nobody spoke for a beat after I set the binder down, and I let it hang there. Blythe's attorney flipped pages, his mouth tightening as the exhibits lined up like dominoes. Wes leaned in and said, "We can do this in ink today, or we can do it in public at trial." And the room finally moved again. By late afternoon, the agreement landed where it should have. I kept control of my lab, my license stayed clean, my clients got a notice, and my employees kept their jobs, no questions asked. The house side got handled without tricks, and I recovered a meaningful chunk of the money that had been siphoned away. Blythe signed too, but her hand shook once before she steadied it, and Verity wasn't there to clap. The inheritance package stayed hers, along with every restriction, repair list, and repayment pressure Eldon built into it. She didn't get a champagne exit. She got a long, expensive job she didn't know how to do, and the court calendar didn't care about her outfit. When she walked out, she tried that polite smile again, and I gave her nothing back. I sold what I needed to sell, because I wasn't hauling poison into my next chapter. I shut down the routines that kept me orbiting her, changed passwords, changed locks, and trimmed my life to what was useful. Then I took Maribel Crane's offer and moved to Colorado, because Denver wasn't a fantasy, and it wasn't revenge. It was a practical reset, with a paycheck, benefits, and work that didn't depend on Blythe's mood. My new building had thin walls and honest people, and that worked for me. Denver stayed simple on purpose. Work, groceries, quiet evenings, and a front door my daughters could knock on without checking the weather inside first. Sable transferred into a program path that put her closer to me, and she did it without begging permission from anyone. Taryn visited often, and she brought her homework and her blunt honesty, the same way she brought that recording when it mattered. Neither of them gave speeches about loyalty, and they didn't need to, because they picked the parent who didn't try to buy them. When Blythe tried to lure them with promises, they answered with schedules, plane tickets, and their own choices. Months later, I heard the loose ends through mutual acquaintances and forwarded messages. Cade Wexler sent a quiet note confirming Blythe's image project collapsed, and Gavin Drescher disappeared the minute the money wasn't quick. I didn't call anyone to celebrate, and I didn't post anything to prove a point. That night, I set 3 plates on my small Denver table, poured water, and opened the door when the knock came. Sable stepped in first with her bag over one shoulder, Taryn right behind her, both of them talking at once before they even made it past the entry rug. I stood there for a second and let the noise fill the apartment. After everything Blythe had tried to reduce to paper, that ordinary sound felt steadier than anything a courtroom could have given me.